I think let's get going. I'm not sure where everyone is, but yeah. Why don't we get going? Luke, will you start us off with
Yeah. So, hi everybody. Luke Warrenson, planner. As always, we'll be helping to facilitate this Zoom. We'll work alongside Chair Finkeldine to facilitate this afternoon's meeting. Few items regarding the meeting operation. I know you've all heard this before, but this meeting is being recorded and it will be broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. For folks online, please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you are not speaking. Chats will be, if you use the chat function, it will go to me and I'll do my best to kind of help you if there's a problem. But it'll go to me, it won't be a public chat. And then unless you're participating during the meeting, it's actually a lot helpful to keep your video off. This allows the active meeting participant to be seen on the screen much larger. You will still be able to hear the meeting and see the meeting. And then when you're participating or you're about to speak, then please turn your video back on. As always, the city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos on to minimize distractions during the meeting. With that, I'll turn it back over to Chair Finkeldine.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for being here, although we have a sparse crowd at the moment. But maybe we can get a lot done if we have less people, less people to deal with. No, but looks like Derek's online, Katie's online, so we do have a couple folks online to help add to the quorum numbers. And of course, Elizabeth is online. I'll start by saying I've been, we're finally getting some good responses to a lot of these topics we've been talking about for a long time, and getting some good discussion going on that. And we're going to have a lot of discussion about that today. Elizabeth's going to walk through some of the responses we've gotten. There's and I've said this to a few people, there's some groups out there saying they want, oh, good. Were you guys having your own meeting out there? Or just kidding?
No. Solve those sorts of problems.
Okay. Good. Now we get the form. There was some talk about, some people have said, you guys are changing so much. And I'm like, that's the point of having public discussion, is to make the changes and continue to iterate this so people can respond to that. What I don't want to do is, stop making changes, receive public comment for 90 days, and then have everyone show up and say, well, why haven't you been listening to me? And so this is exactly the kind of conversation we want to have. And I want people to bring those comments to us and to the Planning Commission. In the perfect world, by the time we get to the City Commission, everyone is happy and everyone's just, live in one big la-la land, and we all, I know that's not going to happen, but I want to be as close as possible, having all those comments through the process. And so, we're a long way from the City Commission voting on this, but I'm very excited that we're getting people paying attention and getting people making comments. And I think that's going to be the bulk of our discussion today, is hearing some of that feedback and us as a committee responding to that and helping direct Elizabeth with our thoughts and then what she's going to incorporate as we go forward. So with that little tirade, I will have Elizabeth move ahead.
You're on mute, Elizabeth.
I was saying that's a pretty mild tirade in the whole scheme of things. Thank you. All right, let me get you guys back up here so I can see and see if I can shut down this little thing. Okay, so following on Chairman Finkeldine's comments, I actually wanted to call an audible in our agenda today because getting straight on the rest of the schedule helps us understand what we need to accomplish in today's meeting and whether or not there will be a July or an August steering committee meeting and what those will look like. So we're here at a consolidated draft looking down the road at adoption and we've had some different options come up. So I created a slide. Hold on. So first off, I just wanted to let everybody know what the recent project input opportunities have looked like. So when we are thinking about what a good approval timeline would be, it's good to know what opportunities have been presented coming into this point in time. So you can see from this slide that we posted the consolidated draft on May 3rd. So we're 6 weeks out from that. It's been posted, and we have received comments on it. We've received some detailed comments on it. I know that there are people that would prefer to wait until it's set in stone, but I think that's what Commissioner Finkeldine was just saying, that we don't really get to set in stone on a document like this. And it's, there will be changes now. There will be changes probably after Planning Commission. And that's how it works. The concepts are pretty solid. We're working on the details. So we did a mid-month Planning Commission meeting on May 8th. We did have some public members there. We did 7 different community outreach meetings, May 15th through 17th, in multiple locations across the city. We had our steering committee meeting on May 16th. Planning Commission, again, their mid-month meeting on June 12th. That were some members of the public there. We're doing this steering committee meeting tonight. And I'm sorry, July 8th and 9th, not 19th. We are scheduling an additional 10 plus opportunities for in-person outreach meetings across the afternoon and evening of both of those days. So there have been, and of course, there have been multiple outreach opportunities across the project. So,
Elizabeth,
Yeah.
in addition to what you have, there was a May 29th Planning Commission public hearing,
thank you.
and it's on again for next Wednesday as a public
Thank you.
hearing.
Thank you.
And I correct me if I'm wrong, was there 2 public speakers at you?
Small.
Two people,
Yeah.
2 people showed up at the Planning Commission
Yeah.
to give their feedback. And I think both of them said, we'll comment later. Give me 90 days and we'll comment. So, but some of them have commented since then.
Yeah, but just to flesh out, there's an abundance of public meetings. Yes.
And just so I understand how the exact nature of the consolidated draft, it's really just copy and paste, putting everything together that was already released up to a year ago, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Nothing's been changed, right? So like from I don't know when the first module was released, but it's been a while ago.
I
And
wanna
it's
say it
still the
was like
same.
September
Yeah.
20.
Feels like it.
Yeah.
Heard it.
Yeah. Because it's that much fun.
It is fun. I like.
So I just wanted to remind everybody, and I appreciate that there are people that come to the project at this point in time. We talked about that early, but it's something we want to bear in mind. What the opportunities have been, and how do we balance that with people who are just joining us now. So, in the last sort of rounds of discussion, we have had. I believe it was Lynn that made the initial request for an additional 90 days. I think the first time I heard it was at that May 29th Planning Commission public hearing. Some of you may have heard it before then. And there have been some letters submitted asking for 90 days. So I put this slide together just to start thinking about what does it mean timing-wise to the project if we go out an additional 90 days. So that means we'd start hearings in late September. My question is, back to steering committee, do we have 90 days worth of work to do? Or would we just stop the clock and sit for 90 days? Is that, how would that work? We also had a planning commission, had a conversation about how they could take the different modules public, break those up, and schedule hearings so the public could come in for all three modules, and then for the pulled together adoption draft if they wanted to. I played with some potential schedules and put those out there. So this is based on hearing schedules we've done with other communities. So some communities set up a series of special meetings. So you do 4 nights in a row if you want to do it broken up that way. Some spread it out over a couple weeks to give everybody a little time to filter and think afterwards. So spread it out over a 2-week period in July or August. I think Planning Commission's initial discussion was do 2 meetings at their regular meeting schedule. So potentially 2 in July or 2 in August. And that's all I think open for discussion and based on what everyone's potential schedules look like. So just looking across those, we talked internally and kind of came up with a suggestion. We are going to hold these additional neighborhood outreach meetings July 8th and 9th. So let's do that. I believe we have that posted to the website. Those dates are up, and we're putting up a scheduling survey to get everyone scheduled. We could have a revised draft based on the comments that we've been hearing from steering committee, the comments we've heard across the last outreach meetings, posted on July 19th. And then we could leave that up for about 6 weeks of review. That's our recommendation. 6 weeks should be ample time to get through those sections of the code that people want to think about that they haven't already talked to us about. And then maybe consider hearings in early September, just again, depending on city scheduling. A couple things we think about as we think about pushing off a project. Would we want to have additional steering committee meetings? This would provide a longer opportunity for comment, but if a project kind of goes dark like that, other priorities tend to fill the gap. And so this project will lose momentum. So in September, we'd essentially have to restart because we wouldn't have been in front of Planning Commission. We wouldn't have been with you guys. And so there's kind of a time penalty for a restart like that. Those are our considerations. I don't know if you want to take it up now or at the end of the meeting, but we wanted to make sure we put it out at the beginning of the meeting, just so it percolated before we got to the last 3 minutes to try to figure this out.
And I would add to that most of the requests I've gotten is they want 90 days before it gets to the city commission. They mean land and some of the letters I received. So, I'd be, interested. I mean, the city commission will schedule it after the planning commission, and who knows if the planning commission will take action after those, or if they'll delay it and schedule for another meeting for action. And then we would schedule for a city commission meeting sometime after that. And whether or not we have 1 meeting or 2 meetings or 3 meetings, on the code is yet to be determined either. So to me, I like this idea that we get the next round out on July 19th, give folks time to review that, and, consider having planning commission in August, maybe early September. But your meeting is scheduled at the end of August, right?
We have, I don't know that this topic is set on the August schedule. Yeah, I barely know. It's going to be.
No, but your meetings would be scheduled the last week of August.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. Now, my sense just in general is that, with that 90-day request, I think is super important. I think the public input is adding a lot to this. I feel like we're doing that. I feel like we've been meeting in mid-months. This will be our 3rd month where the Planning Commission has taken this up as a specific topic. And a lot of feedback from the commission itself has come into this. And then now we're starting to gather through public hearing feedback from the community. Well, and I'm not opposed to setting some fixed amount of time beyond when we say, okay, this is our updated consolidated draft, and give people an opportunity to see all the changes that have been made and provided the feedback. But to your point from the beginning, what is the expectation that we say, okay, we're final, we're going to go 90 days and then we're going to open it back up again. And at what point do those iterations end? One thing I'd love to see is the new draft or a draft of our code with all of the changes that we've been talking about and making. And only then would I really have to be able to say how much longer would we need.
That's exactly
on it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to kind of add is that, early on it was said that a lot of the comments and it just kind of, yeah, that makes sense. Sure, let's add them. We're going to be added in that updated draft. But I was curious about the comments and requests for modification that might be a little bit more controversial and maybe need a little bit more committee input prior to actually inserting or deciding whether or not to insert them at all. So I was curious if those are going to be brought up before or after the draft is released, because if it's after, then, I mean, if there's a significant amount of controversial requests, then it may take longer than 6 weeks. Hopefully not, but I just don't know, right? I mean,
I think it don't.
Well, the other one is, you've been getting comments, has that already facilitated some changes in there that we ought to let people know, because they might be out there thinking the same thing, and hey, we've already heard that comment, we made that.
So that's kind of my point. I don't know what's, of the things we talked about, I don't know what's already done and what's left to it. I stepped on you a minute ago, Michael.
Oh, no, I didn't want to interrupt. Just as the Lawrence Association of Neighborhoods representative, I mean, we appreciate any kind of extension that we're thinking of, 90 days, 45 days. I can't say that we should go with 45. As the rep, I'm authorized right now to say 90 days. But what I do like, and possibly a hybrid of what came from the Planning Commission, is that we use 2 of those Planning Commission meetings, July and August, or August, September, for a dialogue. It's not like everybody just has to be sitting on their hands during that 90 days or whatever. If those discussions are going on in the Planning Commission and the community as a dialogue, then it's a back and forth, and adjustments can be potentially made, not necessarily set in stone until it reaches the Planning Commission for a hearing. So we have those initial discussion meetings ahead of time, in whatever time frame. That's how I could see it happening.
That's what I'm thinking too. And I agree with everyone. I think what we're going to talk about today is some of the changes we've been hearing over the last 6 weeks. Elizabeth's going to present those. We're going to talk about them. And then let's see what happens after the July 19th posting. And plan that with, with Planning Commission feedback, land feedback, other feedback. Well, then, the home builders have made some comments now. We're going to hear from them today. We'll have additional time for folks to make comments on that. So again, I think this is a kind of a living, breathing process. And, and I think that's where we're getting the most done. So I want to keep it.
And one thing that might be helpful is to keep a running list of the things that have changed, rather than try to search through. But here's by line item what we've changed from the original draft. That might make it really easy for people to.
I thought Elizabeth said that a red line items, that's not feasible, that if it can be, that's good.
But we have lists of changes. We have lists of changes.
Yeah, we can do
Okay.
list of changes, but for this version, we will do track changes. So it will stand out.
Okay.
And a little bit to Nick's point, once you see the track changes, I'd say, all the changes we're talking about apply to about, less than 20% of the entire code.
If that.
If that, maybe 10% of the code. So again, what people are looking at and commenting on are really, specific provisions, as opposed to some of the, we want comments on all of them. But those haven't changed in a long time, and so let's hear those comments. So, that sound good, Elizabeth?
Yep, that sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Let's start talking about some of these.
Okay. So these are our discussion questions that we didn't finish up in the last meeting. Let me show you the whole presentation and then we'll back up so we can time what we want to get through. So we had 2 questions open that the group had been discussing. Planning Commission has sent over 3 questions on this slide, and we did read through these last time. And then some additional questions came out of the last Planning Commission mid-month meeting. And then the consultant team had more discussions with staff about the density discussion. How do we measure density? What needs to, or at gross or net, and what needs to come out of it? So we want to go back to that a little bit.
What was I'm sorry, what was the answer to some of those questions that were asked? I'm.
Oh, no. I'm just reading through what we have to
I'm
discuss
sorry.
tonight.
Get ahead,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. No. Just so we can time the meeting. I had the density chart in case we need it. The Lawrence Home Builders Association has comments. Their detailed comments came to you in the agenda, and I have pulled the recommendations onto 2 slides here, so we can talk through those recommendations in light of the other conversations that have been had. And I believe Bobby Flory is in the room with you tonight, and Robert Richardson's on call. So if you want to discuss any of this in more detail, you have excellent representatives. And then I have a blank space for additional topics. And then so we go to our next meeting. So with all of that in mind, do we want to start at the top and work our way through? Is there anything that anyone wants to pull out initially for discussion?
You had the slide on some of the neighborhood changes, the full, are we going to go through those, the
The things that are going into,
neighborhood context?
yeah, hang on 1 second. We actually did a handout on that, and I can share that with you guys. So let me find that.
Yeah,
Page in the agenda.
yeah,
We put it in the agenda, and I was just going to look for the one that I've got here.
okay. Yeah, I just thought you were gonna put that up as a discussion point, because I know some of the other comments, both from Land and Phil had some, and Michael had some that relate to those.
Great. You're 1 sec. Sorry, I didn't have that one ready to go. Whoops. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. No problem. I apologize, guys. Okay, now I'm going to share again. So this is a summary of, and this is not the regulatory language, it's a summary, and it's intended to be something that we use in the neighborhood conversations in a couple weeks. But we took from that one slide that we were all talking about the big changes and put them into categories in this handout. This will become regulatory language. So we've got the 4 categories here. For the definition of infill, we've recommended a definition that will trigger the infill requirements. Based on the conversation, the criteria we came up with is infill is when any perimeter of the proposed infill site is within a half block or 300 feet in areas without blocks of developed parcels. So it's got context. It can be readily connected to municipal infrastructure, and it has a residential unit type with 2 or more attached dwellings. So if someone is going to put a single family unit in a single family neighborhood, that's not going to trigger the infill standards. But if someone is going to do a duplex or a triplex, it will trigger those standards. Second category is infill design. So infill development has to comply with the infill and redevelopment standards. And those are going to be revised as needed to say that infill or redevelopment houses have to be located at about the same place on the front of the lot as the rest of the block. So it's averaged or a contextual setback. The front of the house has to face in the same direction as the adjacent houses. Where there's an alley, off-street parking and vehicle access must be taken from that alley. And the infill house has to have similar roof form, porch orientation, and wall-to-window ratios as neighboring units. So the design needs to work with the surrounding neighborhood.
But I had a quick question about that third bullet under infill design.
Yeah.
What about the cases where the existing plot already has some sort of driveway from the street, and it's maybe a small single family home that's going to be scraped and redeveloped to something larger? Do you have to basically delete that driveway, or can you keep what you already have?
It's a good question, Nick. We would normally say get rid of the driveway.
Okay.
If there's an active alley, use the active alley. That's what the point is. But what I think we're open to the group's preference on that one.
I'm open to agreeing with you, honestly. I just wasn't
Okay.
sure what the direction was. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, the goal is to not do those curb cuts in the front.
please.
Elizabeth, how does this not apply to newly annexed ground adjacent to existing cities? So we would meet the 300-foot criteria. Even if we're across the street or across a highway, we would meet that. So how does this definition exempt Greenfield?
Yeah, so let's go back up to that paragraph, that sentence that starts the definition of infill. So buildings or other facilities on previously unused or underutilized land located with an existing urban or otherwise developed area. We could say not annexation, but eventually the other thing that we talked about and didn't come up with a good answer for is putting an acreage size on it. So some communities use, if it's on a lot that's 5 acres or less, it's infill. 5 acres or more isn't infill. But I think that's a good thing that we may want to, think about for the criteria.
Yes, I assumed urban, otherwise it had to be in the city, and so when it applied to it wouldn't be infill if it's annexation.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, but Phil, are you picturing something else in your head? Like, could something annex in next to urban?
Well, yeah. I mean, what's the first thing that happens? We annex it, so now all of a sudden it's in the city. Yeah.
Well, right, but does it have existing urban development next to it?
I mean, I'd have to think through this. I mean,
Okay.
what I'm thinking about is all the land on the other side of the K-10, right? Okay,
We would not,
that's actually closer than 300 feet because the right of way is only 100 feet wide. It's not as big an area.
yeah, so I think let's clarify that. That's
Okay.
not the intent of this. The intent of this is to raise the existing neighborhood concerns that this applies. So let's make,
And I'm 100% on board with all that. I'm thinking in terms of what I've got on my plate and how is this going to impact?
that's not the point. And I know you have a question about the.
A couple of things about the definition of infill. First of all, it seems to obviously imply not being annexed land, being within the existing city limits. So that should be part of the definition. The part that I've been talking about for a while now is that I think of infill not just proximity to existing development, 300 feet or whatever it might be, but not just the distance or the appearance, but the functional interaction with infrastructure, whether it's streets, sidewalks, bikeways, water lines, sewer lines, stormwater runoff, all of that, and how that, in some cases like stormwater or sewer lines, how that impacts downstream. But the capacity, if the development going to be connected to the existing infrastructure, and that infrastructure won't have capacity in any one of those regards, then that definition should mean that infrastructure capacity needs to be enlarged, just like in any new development. They need to provide adequate capacity. That's done by MSO, I would assume, but that's not where I'm going with this. I just think it should be part of the definition, so that people are on notice that somebody's going to pay for this. Is it the developer? Is it the adjoining neighborhood? Is it a benefit district? Is it the taxpayers at large? It has to be addressed somehow in the definition.
But isn't that the same, irregardless, which is not what we said, both greenfield and infill, that is true regardless. So that's not a distinction between the two.
Well, the thing with greenfield is that when a development comes in, the capacity is built right off the bat. Whereas in an existing neighborhood, particularly an older neighborhood, you're dealing with capacity that may or may not be good enough.
I wish that were true, but I mean, everything that we do ties into the existing city system, but we do a downstream tier analysis and downstream traffic study analysis. And every project has a handful of, so I mean, that's going to be true.
I just wanted to include it verbally in the definition somehow that people understand it. Yeah.
And Phil, this relates to something you've talked about. But Michael, are you saying, are you suggesting that if, for example, the project requires a massive change to the downstream, it should not be considered infill and therefore should not get certain density things? Or do you just want to say?
I think it's a matter of determining who pays.
Okay. Now, Phil, I think you have a different thought on that.
I could think anything, you wouldn't remember it. I want to clarify the 300-foot versus the 500-foot. Earlier in the code, I think it has to do with proportion adjustment. We talk about a 500-foot radius in a 1 block. This is 300 foot and a half a block. My concern goes downstream, no pun intended, when we start talking about notification of the affected neighborhood. Okay, what is the specification going to be to notify people that there's going to be a new infill development? Is it going to be 300 feet? Is it going to be 500 feet? Is it going to be 1 block, 2 blocks? This same specification plays in when you start talking about this maximum lot frontage, and we're taking the average of the maximum lots in a given block. We need to have those specifications down so that the people in the neighborhood know what it is that they're fighting against if they are so inclined. So that's a technical point, but one I think needs to be clarified in the code.
Okay, so let's go back in time here. So, Michael, if you're saying that whether or not the infrastructure capacity needs to be expanded doesn't change the idea that it's infill or not infill, then that probably doesn't go in the definition or the criteria. It's handled outside of the code by MSO and paid for probably by the applicant, but I'm guessing Phil can answer that, Phil Struble, better than I can. So nothing that we do in this particular definition with regard to infrastructure expansion changes what we're defining as infill. So is there something that I'm not understanding here?
Well, to me, it's not just what's across the street, a certain distance that a residence might be from, a new fourplex or something. And that's a concern, and that's valid. But I think functionally, if it means that that house that's across the street from the new fourplex gets sewer backup, that's a concern. And I think it should be factored in somehow.
It's a concern, absolutely. It's not a concern we can change in the land development code.
However,
Yeah, I guess I mean, the reason I think we heard from some of the neighborhoods that said, well, we have a piece of land, all our context-based protections originally dealt with something happening on the street or on a block that was already developed. But what about a situation where there might be some acreage where someone is going to put in a brand new street? Do we get any of those protections, or because it's a new street, is there no context based? And I think the definition here is, hey, if there's something, if you're in the middle of something, let's look at everything 300 feet around you, and use that as the context, not just the street you're on. Because if there's a new street, you're still have neighbors around you. So I think that's where we were saying, let's not just talk about your street or your block, but let's talk about your street, your block, and the area around you, so you can protect that neighborhood. So that's where the definition came from. That's why I think added it. Yeah. And then some of these other protections, I'll just say then, hey, as we're looking at those around you, these infill design standards, these block-based standards, or something. And I think, Phil, you have a couple questions about the exact definition of some of them.
I do, because I do. I mean, I think, and I don't want to repeat myself, but where did we come up with the 300-foot number when on page 198, I believe, when we're talking about proportionate adjustment, we have a 500-foot number, and we have one block versus a half a block. I see this as important because there are other things that Elizabeth addresses here with respect to lot consolidation and so on and so forth that have a geographic dimension associated with them. So let's give the daggone dimension, whatever it's going to be for infill, so that we have a solid basis for setting up the criteria for permitting infill projects. That's what I'm trying to say.
500 feet notification to the residents around it.
It came up in the context of what they term proportion adjustment. The notification ball of wax, I see as completely different. Not completely different. It's related, right. But I don't think it speaks to that specifically.
And what I heard you say is the 300 feet in this specific statement here is the contextual design or the surrounding areas that would be used to help design the infill development.
So I think, yeah, the reason, Elizabeth, you can speak to this, the 300 feet, what the problem we came up with is if all we're doing is comparing to other people on the street, like the average of the lots, what if this development isn't on that street? It's a brand new street. What should we look at? And so now we're saying, look at the 300 feet around it and look at those lots. That doesn't change the fact if you're on a street and you have all these other designs, if all you're doing is one lot on an existing street, those things apply. But we've broadened that definition to include a situation where, Rebecca's building a brand new street and putting 5 houses on it. There's no street to compare it to because it's a new street. Let's look at the houses around.
I think I understand that. I just trying to understand. I'm concerned that the geographic specification will be broad enough to incorporate the surrounding neighborhood. And I'm all the time thinking about single lot infill, not a street development. Single lot infill, that the affected area, which plays into notification in some way, shape, or form, that the affected area is broad enough that the people who might perceive themselves to be most directly affected will be in a position to comment on it.
So let's back that one up a second and Phil, you raised this in your information that you wanted to share with everybody. It's my understanding from the group is earlier conversations and the way this is drafted, a lot of this infill is going to be by right approval, which means there won't be notice for it. And what, the thing about by right approval is that the applicant has to comply with the regulations in the code. And that's the thing they have to do for approval. There are no hearings, and neighbors commenting on the application may not result in any changes at all, which sets up a pretty frustrating situation for the neighbors. So one of the things that we wanted to do with this code change was move away from having everyone comment on everything. So there doesn't need to be alignment with a notice area. So that's how it's working. How are you thinking that there's something different going on? What's the thought? Tell me more.
I'm hoping there's something different going on, and I don't mean to be facetious, but I'm not sold on the notion, and the people that I talk with are, I mean, that is a sea change, okay? In particularly when you talk about duplex conversion, okay? This is something that before was only in R2, was only done via special use permit, right? New duplex conversions?
Not necessarily, because in the current code, you can do it duplex by right, so zoning district.
Conversion of a single family.
Yes.
It's
with the district. Yeah. That if the district is known that you can do it with just a building permit, not a site plan. Under current code.
You're the expert. I'm not. I get the impression that then my line of thinking is wrong, and I apologize for that. I don't think it invalidates the more general point that I believe that people want to be notified and have the opportunity to make comments, even though it is a by right permitting process. They still want to have the opportunity to make comments when they think that their block, however you define the geographic domain, when they feel like they're being affected in a way that isn't in their best interest. And right now, if it's by right and it's strictly a permitting process, if I understood what Elizabeth was saying correctly, then we're not allowing that opportunity. We can make comments out in the ether. We can contact the commissioners, but those communications oftentimes just go into the ether. So
You do not want density by right. You don't want increased density by right. You want
Oh no, I do want increased density by right. But I want to make sure that, number one, that the criteria by which we judge good density increases is well spelled out. And number two, I think we have to have a set of notification procedures, even for something as simple as the duplex conversion. In my opinion, and it has to be more than when the person pastes the yellow building permit sticker on their front door. That the notification has to be more than that.
I guess I think what Elizabeth is saying is if I want to buy a lot next to you, tear down the house and build a new house, and by right, I would have to send a notice out to all my neighbors saying I'm buying the house, I'm tearing it down, I'm building a new one.
No, but Phil,
I'm sorry. Right, that's what by right means, right?
I get that.
Okay. So if you wanted to say, I'm going to tear the house down and I'm going to build a duplex instead of a single family, if it's by right, under this code, you wouldn't have to notify anyone of that either. Third question would be if I were to buy the house and turn it into a duplex, if it's by right, I don't notify anyone. In those three scenarios, you're saying if I'm buying, you think in scenario 2 or scenario 3 or both all three scenarios, folks should be notified.
You know, you all are the experts on this stuff. I only read the language that's there. And
So
yes,
if I'm understanding you correctly, you're differentiating between notification of neighbors and protest right notification of neighbors. Because right now there is two separate categories. Like there's notification of 1,000 feet and, just notification, whereas the protest right is 200 feet, for example. And you're just requesting, I think, that there be notification as a courtesy, if nothing else, just so people aren't blindsided.
I
It's a
think,
matter of requirement.
yeah, I think that community engagement is an important aspect in maintaining strong and healthy, existing neighborhoods. And that if, for example, duplex conversion would really take off, if market conditions were what they were and would really take off, all of a sudden you start to see a significant uptick in activity. But everybody's saying, well, man, what's going on here? All of a sudden, these people turning these houses into duplexes, we're not getting any opportunity to make any comments on that or anything else. So I think that community engagement, notifying the public, if they choose to tear it up or not be involved, that's fine. But the notion of notifying the public, even for by right situations, I think is something that should be strongly considered.
I think that's something that we can recommend as a policy consideration. I absolutely hear what you're saying, and I work in communities that do that, and that the general end result is people are frustrated because they can come talk about a project and can't change it. And so I'm not sure that I buy off on the idea that everyone gets to comment on everything. I don't understand how that provides a benefit. Well, and the next thing is, now that we've raised everyone's expectations that they can comment, and then staff approves it, they're back in front of planning commission or city commission complaining that nothing changed. So what expectations are we setting?
either by right or it's not.
It's also money.
No, I understand that line of thinking, and to me, what that suggests is that if there isn't going to be a notification, that the criteria whereby, planning and development services, MSO, the fire department, fire marshal, so forth and so on, their input in granting an infill permit, the criteria by which they arrive at a yes decision. This is a good thing. This is a valid exercise of the market. That criteria needs to be well enumerated so that if, nerds like myself want to know what did it, how did you arrive at that? Okay. How did you think this was good?
Bill, I feel like you brought this up the past 5 meetings of what are the technical criteria for what this new thing looks like. That's literally section 1 and section 2 of the draft. It gives you the occupancy requirements, the height limits, the setbacks, the floor area, the lot size. It's literally in there. Is there anything that you're confused about or that you don't see that you really need to see? I feel like there's something hidden here that we're not hearing of why you feel there isn't enough definition already. It's all defined in the tables that we've all seen.
And I've looked at the tables, Nick, and studied on them, and I don't agree with that characterization that it's defined, in sufficient detail to have the greatest likelihood possible of having good infill development outcomes.
So since we can't kind of reach your mind of what you think is missing, it'd be really helpful to have an explicit recommendation for what dimension, what occupancy requirement, what use, what potential special use permit are you not seeing that you think is really important that hasn't been covered yet over the past year?
Well, maybe maybe the elephant in the room is, what are the parking requirements gonna be for new infill development? Quadplexes, duplexes to quadplexes in existing neighborhoods.
That's defined in the code. And it currently is defined as having no minimum parking requirements, except for this one bullet at the very, very bottom where you must preserve existing parking. It's defined. If you don't like the parking requirements, I can understand, but that's not the same as not defining it.
Okay, well,
I'll just bring up the issue of what do you do? I mean, it's one thing to say you keep the parking that you have. It's very different if you live in a neighborhood that was built without parking. So all of a sudden, I mean, it's one thing to have some parking that you can figure out what you're gonna do with. It's another thing, and I live on the one block in Oread that has no alley, and very limited access to on-street parking because so many of the houses have no parking. So when you say, oh, we can just make these old duplexes, that's where that issue might be a problem.
From a business standpoint, say I'm the guy buying a house and I decide to turn it into a duplex from the economic standpoint of then trying to rent it. And I mean, we have informed people, right?
We rent in August when the students aren't there and many of the other properties aren't occupied. I'm just saying, you can come look at a house, look at a rental property, think there's not gonna be a problem to park because there's street parking, and this is because there are people who, I mean, our next door neighbors rented the house for 3 months without being there because they wanted to come back
Well,
in August.
I think what we talked about last time again is, and the way I lean is preserving what you have and then going towards a permit process. Because what, I mean, again,
It doesn't happen,
is that we have limited the entire city from, I don't want to limit the entire city from being able to achieve density because some neighborhoods have tough parking and other neighborhoods don't. So I think we have to address those, in the neighborhood context. That's my thought.
So, and I agree with that, but it doesn't help to have permit parking if there's more people who can get a permit than there are parking spaces.
Well,
So, I mean,
fix the permit system.
What? No. I mean, you can't tell somebody who lives in a house, you're the one that gets a permit and the next person doesn't. I mean, the permit parking usually means if you live in that neighborhood, you can qualify for a permit.
But it can be the other way around, can't it? That if you don't live there, you have to have a permit, otherwise you can't work
But but we have more people
in general.
in general,
Oh.
and we're now increasing the number of people who can live at each of the units.
But if you say, you could say, what I've seen in other places is there's 2 permits per lot.
You just make more great.
And if you have a duplex or a triplex on that lot, in that neighborhood, you only get 2. And if you can rent those and have 2 parking spots, I mean, that happens all the time in other cities, right? I mean, my daughter lives in a there's 4 people who live there and they have 1 parking spot. My daughter doesn't have a car, so she doesn't care. But they only get 1 parking spot, 1 permit for that building. And so you can address those issues in your neighborhood, which would be completely different than my neighborhood, which would be completely different than North Lawrence, which would be completely different than West Lawrence.
And so I'm thinking this one size fits all may not be a really good approach because we want density in our neighborhood. And we want, if you have 5 bedrooms in a house, you ought to let 5 people live there. You shouldn't just say, we're going to limit this to 4. And we've been doing that. So we want to increase that density, but we don't necessarily want to say somebody can now come in and build. You can build 7 units in our neighborhood if you don't have to have parking. So now all of a sudden, you know, somebody has an existing house.
But what if we have a permit system that's different, that says you can build 7, but you only get 2 parking permits?
We tried to work on a permit system for 30 years.
Well,
It hasn't happened, and I don't know that, let's talk some about that and understand, and before we adopt this, understand how that permit system might work, and before we ask people to comment on this, say, we're thinking in your neighborhood that you're gonna have a permit system that only allows 2 cars. And I don't know the neighborhood that your daughter lives in and how close the grocery store is, you know, and what kind of transit there is. But all of those things also make a difference. So,
The permit system is a completely separate body of work that would be done.
yeah, I mean, Brad Hill's already working on that with our new system. To expand those,
Manifest in this, it would be.
so it'd be manifested in, and it'd be very neighborhood by neighborhood. One neighborhood could have a different parking permit system than the next neighborhood. It wouldn't be a uniform parking system.
I understand that. I just don't want to assume that a permit system is going to solve different issues in different neighborhoods.
Yes.
I had one other very different comment,
Go ahead.
which was just when you talk about this idea, you know, is it within the city boundaries and annexation? Maybe we need a time frame, because that could limit. It's not infill if it's been annexed within the last 5 years. So all of a sudden,
1968 or something.
5 years. No, I'm just saying it's not in, I mean.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, again, I think the purpose of this definition of infill is to protect the neighborhoods around. If there's no neighborhoods around it to protect, I mean, that's what we have to get to. Right, I mean, if you're across K2 and you're in a green field, there's no neighborhood to protect. Like that's what this definition is saying. We want this context-based stuff to apply to.
So here's one that we've heard already. And I'd be interested in Elizabeth's take on this, but you know, the infill of the Albemarle Golf Course. Right? And it is not platted, not lotted. It's going to be zoned whatever we decide to zone it. But the houses that back up to the golf course are all 10,000 square feet. The zoning has a minimum and a maximum density and setbacks that are dramatically different than everything they abut. So you can meet a couple of the infill design criteria, but you're not going to meet them all with the new filled into the golf course. So how do we and that they're not the only large piece unplatted adjacent to other neighborhood kind of parcels in town that, you know, pose some really interesting problems. And so how do we deal with that?
How much, but that property is currently zoned, is it not?
Or a 7? Let's go R2.
Okay, so what will they not be able to meet if they develop it within the infill standards?
Well, they're going to be, they're going to be 4,000 square foot lots backing up. I mean, they're not going to meet the character of the neighborhood that they're going in. They're going to be totally different.
What do you mean by totally different? I mean, if they put single family units on smaller lots, will that not be somewhere close to what's going on?
Well, do we have a somewhere close? caveat in our
I'm
code?
asking you, I mean,
You know, I mean, it's a, you know, what is 1,800 square foot house on a 4,000 square foot lot in the neighborhood that house 10,000 square foot lots, and the houses are all 4,000 square foot.
can't that happen?
I just asked the question because, I mean, you know, these people are looking for answers about this, and so, you know, can they come in and, you know, put these houses in it? It is 1,800 square foot houses backing up to the bigger house neighborhoods compatible with our infill design guide?
I think so. I think that's what infill is on many occasions, smaller units next to larger units. Infill
hope
doesn't
we
mean
could-
that
I
they
would
have to
hope we could-
match.
Yeah, I would hope we could do that. I mean, to me, that's a huge goal for affordability is we have to be able to build different size units
Yep.
next to other size.
Yeah.
units.
And also, unless you change the zoning, it's going to be R2, which means that you have a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet. So the 4,000 square foot lot is not actually a realistic situation.
So it's 5,000 instead of 4.
At least 5,000. Yeah.
So,
Now, of course, there are all sorts of interesting issues with subdivision regulations.
yeah,
Yeah, but anyway, yes, okay. Well, we're already at 5 o'clock. I know we have some planning commission questions and we have some questions from the, suggestions from the home builders. What do you want to go to next, Elizabeth?
That, if you don't mind, I was actually hoping to comment on some of the new things that kind of snuck in on that bullet
Go
point
ahead.
list to
Yep, sure.
residential design guidelines. And some
Yeah.
of those are new. And I think actually they're a little bit of conversation, at least I may be in the minority here, but there's one that said that infill development has to have a similar roof form, porch orientation, wall to window ratio as neighboring units. That kind of flies in the face of how historical development has proceeded and led to the look at what we now call historic neighborhoods. So do we want to now have a monoculture going forward? Or do we want to continue to develop eclectic neighborhoods that we supposedly love? The second one is that the front 30% of any infill, I think it's a little bit further down block-based standards. The front 30%, like towards the street of any infill structure, may not exceed the average height of structures on adjacent lots. So if you were in Sunset Hills and you scraped and rebuild a single family home, most of those houses are single story. You could probably do a 2-story single family home just fine. Duplex? Nope, can't do it, right? That seems a little bit unfair. Finally, conversion of a single family unit to a duplex must include preserving any existing on-site parking. I agree, but can we say parking capacity? Because in some cases, the existing parking may not work and you may want it somewhere else. So we can just say, like, if you have 2 spaces, keep 2 spaces, but they don't have to be the same physical spaces.
I made that point. That second point, though, you said that faster than I comprehended. Say
Yeah.
it again. About 30%?
So say you have a row of single families, 1960s ranchers, and you want to knock one down and build a new Studio 804 2-story box. That's allowed. But if you wanted to build a non-Studio 804 2-story duplex, can't do it because it's a different thing. Because currently the single family regulations don't disallow going higher than everybody else as long as it's reasonable. I mean, you're not going to build an 8-story single family home, right? That's yes. But a 2-story on a block of single stories, that's widely considered acceptable. There's always going to be that one person who's like, oh, I hate it. But by and large, that's fine. But it's weird that we are now applying this to other things that might be another unit in it, right? So it seems
I
like
think we have to build up too.
Yep,
And I
that's
don't want-
fine.
Givenly.
I carried this forward because it was on the list the last time we talked, and so you could do 2 stories on this. You just need to step down for the first 30%. So the back 70% could be that second story. But and that's the ranch neighborhood is exactly kind of what you're thinking about here. But if this doesn't seem to make sense for Lawrence, we can take this one out. It's fine. This was something we didn't spend a lot of time talking about last month. And then the similar roof form, porch orientation, and wall to window ratio as neighboring units. Those, in my opinion, are just some of the basics of how you take infill and have it work with the neighborhood, which was what I thought the concern was. I don't have a problem taking that out. I thought that we were going down a path of making sure kind of on a block by block or a neighborhood by neighborhood area, that infill wasn't jarringly different.
Yeah, so I agree that that is generally what people would probably say they want, at least on the aggregate. But you do have quite a few instances of infill going in and it being very different from other properties and still being celebrated, as long as it's by the right architect. But typically speaking, people can be okay with stuff. Like I mean, yeah, are there examples of where it's going to suck? Sure. But the idea of having fairly granular development is that one ugly house isn't going to ruin the whole block, whereas one block-sized apartment building does ruin the whole block if that's really ugly. So I feel like the standards kind of do have to be a little bit higher on stuff that has the potential to greatly disrupt. Whereas a single house on a block of 12, like, oh, all right, there's that one ugly house, but there's always like that one ugly house. And it may not be because of its root design. It may be because they have a lot of bikes in the front. Yeah, who knows, right? So it seems a little bit micromanaging, honestly.
Well, I certainly agree that I mean, some of these changes have been coming from neighborhood groups and neighborhood meetings saying,
Yeah.
we all concerned about massive changes in our neighborhood. So yes, this is the compromise side. And I certainly hear what you're saying that,
And you're gonna need a definition of the front 30% in case nobody knows what that is.
and it's a good point. So I do think it's a compromise from, so I guess that's that's kind of the question with this committee and some of the input we've been getting. Yeah, I mean, one is, we don't have any limits on it. That's how the first draft was. This draft has come back after listening to lots of people come in and talk, but we try to add some protections while still leaving some flexibility. What do people think we've gone too far, not far enough?
I just look at like in the last 10 years, the blocks east of like Massachusetts, 10 blocks east from 6th to 15th, you have a wide variety of infill projects there in the last 10 years. And you have everything from a super modern, you have a completely glass house to, traditional bungalows. And I mean, it's eclectic, but that like the wording here, I guess, from my perspective would limit that.
And by the way,
And that's
I
like,
think the argument further, the interesting part is, to your point, if I want to build the duplex and there's no other houses like that, I probably can't do it. But if you buy the house and build a single family house that's 2-story, and then I come in with an application for a duplex, now that you have a 2-story, now I fit in with the neighborhood and now I might be able to build the duplex that I couldn't have built the year before.
Why couldn't you build it though? Why couldn't you build it?
Well, I mean,
Let me just say it as a hypothetical.
hypothetical, if I wanted to build a 2-story because every house on the street's a rancho,
Okay,
and I have to be similar to all the others.
okay.
But now if I've put that in, my duplex might not fit in my design. But if Nick buys one of the ranchos and builds a 2-story single family, he can do that. And now all of a sudden that street has now I want to build a 2-story duplex next to a 2-story single family. Now it might be allowed.
now a duplex, one up, one down. So you have 2 stories.
I mean, there is a drawback. I mean, that's kind of the drawback of a system that tries to protect what's there. But I do think it's an attempt to try to protect neighborhoods a little bit from too much change.
But roof form isn't number of stories.
It's the shape of the roof. So think about a modern house with a flat roof versus like a Victorian with a very.
Well, I know, but I'm just saying, I think these comments aren't necessarily related to 1-story or 2-story.
Right, it's
Oh,
just-
I think Commissioner Finkeldine was talking about the 30% one a little further down on the list.
The front 30% of any
Yeah.
infill structure must not exceed the average height of structures on the adjacent lots.
But then you can, that means you have a smaller portion to the front.
Yeah,
Sure.
well, I'm just saying,
You can have your garage.
but it is arbitrary that if I come in with a design that is completely, not setting back at all,
Mhm.
and there's 2 ranchos next to me, my adjacent lots, I can't do that. But if Nick buys that lot and builds a 2-story single family house, and 1 year later, after he builds his house, I come in, now the average of my adjacent lots are different. so my design can be different. And if 3 years from now, the other lot becomes 2, then maybe it's always based upon the single family houses next to you, which can change over time, which means this definition changes over time.
I don't know if it'll change much though, because it's the average of, oh no, sorry, it's the average of Jason's lots. I was thinking it was average on the whole block.
Oh, which are Jason.
My mistake.
And so, but it still, I think, adds protection. I'm not saying against it. It is somewhat, I mean, Nick is right, it's somewhat arbitrary, depending on what the single family houses in your neighborhood are doing. Because if you go to one of those streets on New York that now has 2 brand new houses that look all sorts of things, someone could do a duplex on that lot that they're gonna do 1 block over because no one has sold their houses. But the idea is to protect those houses a little bit, give them some protection. So the question is, are we okay with a little bit of that arbitrariness to protect the neighborhoods? I am, but I'm asking what others are.
Well, if I'm reading this correctly, is that 30% front of the building, if that's the yardstick? I think Phil's point is valid, that's gonna be a negotiable measurement. I mean, how do we define the front 30%? It's gonna be negotiated, I would think, between
It's
the.
gonna be from the
applicant
building
and-
around backwards. From the
Yes.
front of the building backwards. So the 30% from the front into the structure.
Probably feet, but feet.
If your house is 50 feet deep, if your house is 50 feet deep, then the front 18 feet, or I can't do math, that would have to be conforming to a single story look, and then you could go vertical after that.
Well, I'm interested, we put out a set of regulations, whatever, a month ago that didn't really have many of these protections. My vote is we put these out here on July 19th, and let's see what feedback we get. We might get feedback that says too restrictive. We might get feedback that says not restrictive enough, but I think this is at least a compromise to get something out there for people to talk about that's different.
So try to work with the wording, because you could interpret the front 30% of an infill structure to be 30% of the structure, which is different from 30% of the lot. So let's make sure we.
Get us the structure.
Structure. It'd be hard to misinterpret.
So so the bigger structure you have on the back, the
Is it,
larger area you have to have,
is it
Yep,
square
that's-
footage? Is it?
yeah, is it square footage?
It's a linear.
Yeah.
Good.
They talk about linear depth.
There will be a definition and measurement instructions.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to home builders, and then I want to go to planning commission. You said you had something.
Well, it was on this same list. I can wait. Okay.
Same list.
Well, yeah, that block-based standards business. Maximum lot frontage width can't be wider than the average width of other lots on the block. So we're talking the immediate block face. Is that what we're talking about? I mean, literally just that block. You live on the south side of 4th Street between Indiana and Mississippi. And so it's just there's 2 houses addressed to that block.
Okay. So how do we want to do this? This is meant to be explanatory, right? We're handing this out to the public. So we can do simply the block face that we're measuring, or we can do both block faces. We don't want to get any deeper than that. So is it both sides of the street or just the side of the street that the unit is going to be located on?
Well, I think that given the parking wars that pessimistically I see coming, I think you'd have to consider both sides of the street.
I think it's fair to consider both sides of the street.
Definitely.
Okay, let's go to the home builders.
What about the other questions that were brought up on the agenda that were left over from last
I was
time?
gonna say, home builders, then coming to the those planning commission questions.
Okay,
Yep, we don't get to those too.
I got you.
Alrighty. Section. And, okay. And we flip back to where we were. Whoops. Maybe.
Well, she's part of that. Bobby, do you want to
Yeah.
say anything you start or?
Sure. I submitted comments, in writing on what we have, reviewed, from the document. And also I have listened to all the meetings and I appreciate everybody's time and discussion. It's really been thorough and people are listening out there. I'm not sure what the expectation of me today is for this, but, I'm happy to go over it or I'm happy to answer any questions, but I will say that my goal was to look at the big picture on this, which I started, the first portion of this, document, listed the big picture items, and then followed it up with some specifics in the articles that we just wanted to go on record with. So what is your, preference on how I approach this today? Just take questions, or would you like a presentation?
Well, I think we've all had it and we read it. I think we have some summaries. I don't think we need a presentation.
Okay.
I think we want probably to have questions. Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to say anything about these big picture topics.
I have a few questions, and I had an opportunity to talk to Bobby, and she kind of explained all of the stuff that went into the memo that she shared with everybody. So just the two I wanted to focus on, the very first one, talk to us a little bit about removing when you say minimum mandates, I'm thinking you mean the minimum density requirements.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about the concerns you heard around that. Okay, so in the R1 district, that is the only district that doesn't have a minimum density requirement. And then you go to R2 and you have, you do have the minimum of 4 units per acre with a maximum of 6 and then on up. And the concern is that if you are in an R2 district and you don't want to go that dense, that this code doesn't allow you to not go as dense as 4 dwelling units per acre. And my point of giving all the chapters of Plan 2040 was to say that density was a goal and a mix was a goal, and these were encouraged. And I think the point of this code is to, by increasing the density maximums, that's the encouragement. But it doesn't say in this code that it has to force certain density. So if you remove that minimum, it allows that flexibility for the market to meet the consumer demand in all districts. But each district has a maximum. And actually, when you remove the minimum, you also encourage more of a mix within each zoning district. So that would be another positive point to it.
And I know we had some of this discussion last week, I think last time, when, Phil, I think had this question about whether one answer is, well, if you want to don't want to have the minimum, zone it to all one. I think Phil's response is, I was hoping to have one district that could do a lot of different things, and as opposed to having some all one, some all two.
Then you have to go back in and do the spot zoning, and then it gets opened up to the public comment, and that changes it just makes it harder. It doesn't make it impossible. It just makes it harder. And isn't this what we're trying to do, is to grow our housing at all points? And this just make it easier to create more housing. I think that's another important point of what I was trying to make in here. It's not all about affordable housing. The way you get affordable housing is to build more housing. And then that housing opens up opportunities for people to move. Right now, we are so locked up. People are not moving because there's nowhere for them to go because of the supply. But it seems like that should be our goal, to support all housing.
Those are the arguments. Elizabeth, do you have other questions, or I let the committee comment on that?
Go ahead and let the committee comment on that.
So one thing I would say is, we've seen that there is going to be a difference between those neighborhoods that have homeowners covenants and associations and other neighborhoods. So what do we want to see for new development? Because if you don't have a minimum, then you can say, oh, we can keep building some of these. This is, some of these larger lot subdivisions, and we can have a homeowners association, and they won't have to bother with any of the other requirements that some of the existing neighborhoods are going to have to face. So I'm sort of saying, how do we say we're all sort of in this together, rather than we're going to draw some lines and say,
There is a portion of the market though that wants houses that wouldn't fit in the current zoning categories in Lawrence. And we have a
oh,
significant,
no, I understand that.
yeah. So are we excluding them from being able to buy or build a house in town?
Well,
That's the point.
I think the pushback, I think the pushback from others is, if that's what you want to build, let's approve that in all one zone versus, hey, someone comes in and says, what's happened in the past is we're going to zone this R2, and someone comes in and says, I want to build all this density, I'm going to do all this stuff, and gets approved, then that developer doesn't do anything. And then the next developer comes in and says, well, I'm not going to do any of that, it's R2, there's no minimum requirement, now I'm going to build something different. I'm just going to build large lot things. And the community then never got the choice to say, we want that in R1, and we approved it. What we approved was R2, and now we're getting R2, we're getting R1, actually R2 lot. That's the question. I hear you. And I'm thinking about, new developments. I think it's a harder question when we have, all 7 lots already developed here in town. And we switch them to R2, and now we have minimum density requirements that are pre-existing subdivisions. I think that's going to be more difficult.
Well, that's a concern also, that there are different standards for, if it's a concern about density and infill, wouldn't you also recognize that that's a concern maybe for in Greenfield to have that level of density? So I'm saying, just because it's new, there's no pushback from consumers. And builders, I think I've heard a comment, like, we need to force this density, because if we don't, they're just going to build what they've always built. Well, that's not really an accurate statement. Builders are going to build what consumers want. They're not just building houses because that's the product they know how to build. They build what they understand that the consumers want. I think that's an important thing to remember. I don't know what it would hurt to remove the density. You would still get potential, to remove the minimum density. You would still have an opportunity to get a higher dense development. And I'll also mention that from the National Association of Home Builders, they've done some studies, and they're saying that consumers are buying smaller lots for the very reason that you all know. It's because it's more affordable for them. So really the market in that situation is taking care of that, but there still are consumers that have the interest and ability to build on a larger house on a larger lot. And I'm just simply saying, why are we precluding that as part of the rainbow of housing?
That if our comprehensive plan and potentially the code is going to be encouraging more mixed use, more variety, it seems like the term spot zoning is an anachronism. Yeah, that's from a day when we had a homogeneous kind of size and view and design, where we're moving away from that. I would think we are, at least, to much more variety of size and bulk and color. And isn't that what we're trying to achieve here? Density that has some large structures, some small structures. But that's not going to work. You're doing the end products could be the opposite of that, because
if I have to, so let me just give you an example. I think this, we need to put it in context a little bit. So, we did a project, some of you remember it, Monterey Gardens, right? It's at the corner of Peterson. Had to do a plan unit of PRD development on that to get the density, to make those more affordable housing than before. Okay, so on a gross density basis, and this is one of the more dense single family developments. That's 2.6 units to the acre. And we're talking in here of 1.5 to twice that density as being the rule of our single family developments in town. On a net basis, it's I believe, it's off the top of my head, it's like 5.5 because you cut out all the open space right away. So it's just your lots. And so to just throw in, what is just kind of not necessarily arbitrary, but rule of thumb densities, when most of our developments have so many extraneous, open space requirements, utility easements, rights of way for adjacent roads, a lot of other factors go into that. To just start throwing in, these minimum and even maximum density requirements in some of those neighborhoods is hugely problematic. I mean, we will be fighting this on every single project.
I can agree that gross density calculation brings problems, and I'd be a favor of switching that to net.
But we'll need to look at the whole.
I do though think that minimum mandates, I mean, they're the forcing function for a comprehensive plan. We're the product of the market-driven approach today. It certainly hasn't provided affordable housing. It hasn't provided relief to the kinds of things that we imagine that these changes might make. So I am in favor of minimum mandates because it gets us there. And I think about R2. I'm in R2, right? I'm part of that group that's going to be subject to whatever might be built in my backyard.
And you need to be in our work. I mean, that's the bottom line, and I'm going to argue that till the end.
And that might be a step that happens down the road. But all I'm saying is, in R2, that's 4 minimum per acre, and if I do the math right, that's a little over 10,000 square foot per lot. Particularly if we're talking net, just right. And then at R1, we're bill RS10 and above. There's some that kind of makes sense to me. And they go down, and then when you add the ability to do mixed use, different types of housing inside of that, I'm not sure where the limit comes from. If we just remove minimums across the board, we have enabled a little bit of new things, but there's no forcing function that really changes any of the behavior and as I say behavior, I don't mean good or bad behavior. I mean the activity, the way that we approach things. This causes us to look at things through the lens of what 2040's asked us to do.
Elizabeth, have you looked at the net versus gross? We talked about that last time.
We did look at the net versus gross, and we actually were able to, staff worked through some existing sites to see if we could meet the density. Let me flip slides. Whoops. So we think based on staff's work doing some residential development sites and looking at some development in the city, that it is possible to meet the minimum densities. I mean, we certainly know other cities meet the minimum densities. It's a change. So it's a change from what Lawrence has done to what Lawrence can do. We have some recommendations, and listening to what Gary was just saying, the group might not go this way, but we think we should stick with gross as a measurement baseline. It aligns with Plan 2040, but that we can identify a list of major non-buildable areas that come up across different sites, so easements or sensitive areas, to exclude that. We think to get to 2040, the code may need to allow more dimensional adjustments. So what the driving factor isn't the lot size or the lot dimensions so much as the density. And if the lots need to be adjusted in size or dimension reasonably to get to that density, that's the next step towards implementing the plan, not saying we're backing away from density. So where the question would be, on any individual project, where would changes need to be made in order to allow the developer or the property owner to get to the density reflected in the plan?
So just as the baseline question, because I don't know, is gross minus, how is gross minus a list of things you remove from gross different from net? Is net a defined term?
That's going to
someplace
take
else in
out
code?
the streets also. So the example that Phil Struble gave last time we met was, before we even get to streets, we have easements, or we have something on every parcel, there's realistically something that can't be built on. So we're trying to take a middle ground here, and, we're open to going back to net. I think it's the third bullet that's the important part. You will be allowed to get to the minimum density.
I certainly like the idea of being able to change lot dimensions to get there. I mean, I think that's something we've run into all sorts of times, problems with, not being able to get, enough frontage or enough lot size, or this one is and then we get weird lots, we have to put a big lot. So I think having that adjustment is very useful. So, but the difference between what you're proposing and net is basically just the roads?
Yeah. And I was trying to pull everybody's thoughts into this. So we could, I guess we would want to do a plan amendment possibly to take the gross to net in the plan, and then change the code from gross to net, and then allow the adjustment to get to minimum density.
And are you thinking this is per development as a whole, not individual lots?
It's measured as dwelling units per the acre. So I'm not sure what your distinction is. Could you explain a little more?
Well, I mean, every project has corner lots. And they're going to be 50% bigger than the rest of your lots, because you got two rear yard setbacks to deal with. And there's going to be multiple of them. And so those are always going to be the big lots. And so, if you could have a 30 and 3/5, is that an example? I'm an exaggeration, but that makes it different. Yeah. So, you're going to have, 5,000 square foot lots, and then I'm going to have, every corner is going to have an 8 and a 10.
So you measure it not by each acre, but by the number of acres inside of a development or project.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not suggesting there's a compromise, because I don't like the idea, but it's something we'll need to know to go forward, because I mean, that's one of the major hurdles. Yeah.
The advantage to that, if you could have an average rather than a required lot size, is that then we could start to see more of the mixed use. You could start to say, okay, this part's going to be townhouses, and this part's going to be single family. And here, so we're looking for a density within that larger area, which sort of seems to make sense for me, because if we really just say it's per lot, then we're not getting any opportunity for this mixed use. But you could then say, oh, okay, this is the size of my development. I know that I have these people who would like to buy a house on a larger lot, and we're going to make that happen because we're going to have some townhouses. I mean, is that a possibility, or do those not would those not both be allowed to be built in that?
Not. I hope we can. And I think the code that was written today would allow adjustments, 15% adjustments to setbacks. So you could, in theory, make that a lot smaller. Can,
It's, if all the adjustments don't automatically tie back into your maximum or minimum. I mean, a maximum or minimum is a maximum or minimum, right? So, yeah, give us all the adjustments you want. We still have maximum and minimum. So,
I do think however we do it, there has to be consideration in some way for the area that's not buildable.
yes,
Just as, I don't see the logic in, and including that in the
yeah, absolutely.
approach calculation. However you take it out, I think it's gotta be a consideration.
I agree with that.
So one of the things I wanted to share was just to remind everybody that we shrank a lot of the setback sizes. So, you know, and these may need to shrink more, but in R2, 3, and 4, we've come down from 25 to 10 on front and street side setbacks.
Does this apply to North Lawrence?
It plays everywhere. What's North Lawrence? So
Well, I'm just telling you, from having sat through a lot of discussions, people in North Lawrence need to drive their pickup truck into their backyard because they're harvesting. I mean, and that is a serious, they're harvesting tomatoes or, you know, whatever they're growing because they have really deep lots. And so I'm just saying in that place, you want to be able to get a pickup truck back.
are they?
And it is different things happening in different neighborhoods, and they have got really good soil, and they've got really deep lots. So I would have a little.
Not in the future, they're not going to have room. Some will.
Some will, because if you're back against the river, it's not going anywhere.
Well, okay. So the river's now another exclusion from, like,
Why? But isn't that true?
sensitive.
I mean, if you've got, that's not Elm Street, but yeah, okay.
Okay, let's talk about that. Okay, so this idea of gross versus net versus a modified gross, basically.
Right.
Versus no minimums whatsoever.
However you get at it, consideration for unbuildable area.
I think I would just like to say that I still believe that Plan 2040 did not mean to dictate the strong densities. And that's why I pointed out in all the bullet points that it wanted to encourage it, accommodate it. And I think that's absolutely what this code has done. By the way, if I didn't say it earlier, I'm pretty excited about this code. I mean, I hope that doesn't come across it. I don't think this is not a good code. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm here to tell you that if you want it to work for the building community and make it easier to build more houses, then that would be our recommendation. But if you don't, it will still happen. It's just going to require additional effort as far as, and money, which increases the cost of housing and going through the development process.
Okay, we had a second comment there. Elizabeth, you said you had 2 questions.
Yeah, my other one was, Bobby, if you could just talk about the list of the remove or reevaluate codes that unnecessarily increase the cost for housing.
Okay.
And you had 6 things on that list. So if you could just go through that list, that would be great.
We've seen this list.
These are some things that we brought up several years ago to the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. Kind of fell on deaf ears, and these were some of the main ones that we thought would really help in reducing the cost of housing. So we just kind of brought them back because I don't believe any of these things were ever changed. Require sidewalks on one side of local streets rather than both sides. There was a staff member, not Jeff, who said that they thought there was a social injustice to not requiring sidewalks on both sides of the street. So that's a tremendous savings, by not requiring it on both sides of local streets. Reduce street width standards. I think that we all know that when you reduce the width, that you do slow traffic down, and I think there's some benefit to that, to taking a look at you know, what we can do on local streets to even slow traffic down. Let me go back. Let's see, on the sidewalks, I did want to say that ADA requires 3 foot, and I know Elizabeth thought it was 5. We require right now 5 foot width on the sidewalks. ADA requires 3, which I wouldn't go that narrow, but I believe every 200 feet you need to have a turnaround option, but a driveway, if it's on a flat plane, it can accommodate that turnaround. So there is some wiggle room in there to even reduce the width of sidewalks. I guess that was okay. And then number 3, eliminate the requirement to install sidewalks and curbs before the home is built and it's under construction. The builders babysit their curbs and sidewalks like crazy, trying to keep them from getting hurt. And, you know, they really get onto their subcontractors about it. And again, I don't mean to give the city a hard time, but a lot of times it's the utility people that come in and don't and heed the cautions. But they do things like they put sand over it, or they, you know, block it off so that those are protected. And then they end up going back in and replacing those things. And it's just not a very sustainable practice. And then we did have a big problem about during final inspection before they could get occupancy permit, although I haven't heard any complaints about this lately, but they would go through the sidewalks and just look for just hairline cracks, which were not, they were cosmetic, possibly, if there was a crack. And if they saw a hairline crack, they had to be pulled and rebuilt or reinstalled. Those sound like little things, but they do add to the cost of every house. Eliminate the downstream sewer analysis requirement. This is one that we talked to engineers about, and they said that they do them, but really the city doesn't use their data. They have their own data that they rely upon for that. So it's just another added expense that could be removed. Reducing the street tree minimum requirements. Right now it's every 40 foot. If we reduce that to, you know, whatever it is, every 50 or every 60 feet, I think trees are great, but if you look at some of these trees, even in the newer neighborhoods since the street tree requirement has been there, you just look at them and you think, okay, that's going to be a future problem. That is a sidewalk that's going to need to be repaired because it's going to create that disproportion. It's where they're placed and it creates problems. So I'm just saying we're putting all these trees in, but those trees have future maintenance issues. Our church has a tree that has a crack in it, and I got an estimate, $8,800 to remove that tree. So I'm just pointing out that all these street trees today are great, but in the future, they are going to be a problem. And because of where they're located, which is right next to the sidewalk, also affects that. So maybe we could reduce that. And eliminate the traffic impact study on smaller subdivisions. So those were the points that and there's more, I'm sure, Elizabeth and others, but those are the ones that we've kind of promoted over the years.
I think Julie, yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering if the average width of the sidewalk could help say what the street tree number is, because if you have 50-foot lots, and having it every 40 foot doesn't work out very well. But if you had it to somehow try to tie that requirement for the trees.
So one per lot, all 30 poles, 50 feet on every big front. Yeah, it comes in with the final plat for show. That's just, you can build lots with no trees. That's we don't. I mean, we don't.
If it's a corner lot, it could have up to 7 trees easily on it, on a quarter lot. Do it.
I love the idea of changing the sidewalk. Right now, the city is probably right now pouring a sidewalk that's wider than the sidewalk it goes into. And I'm not sure that that's helpful, and it's certainly going to be ugly. I think it's going into 3 foot. Correct. So anyway, but we don't need it, especially on 2 sides of the street.
I know a few of those, so, you know, and I know other people we've talked about street widths, and some of that's in not that directly in this code. It's in subdivision regulations and the other codes. We all going to be talking about that in the design regulations, not necessarily here, but some of those things are all in this code. Elizabeth, did that? Did you
Yeah, I
ever, I mean, we've heard these before, so.
Yeah, no, what I thought was interesting about it is, you know, of all the things that we've talked about of what's going to be good to recommend and what's going to be hard to recommend, this particular list of, you know, the top 6 isn't, you know, stuff that we've spent a lot of time on. And so I wanted just to focus the group on that. And, you know, maybe as we walk away from this meeting, think about what these requests might mean in, you know, in terms of the overall picture of what we've been looking at. I think a lot of the rest of this, Bobby, is well explained. And so it looks like we're definitely having a steering committee meeting in July because we have stuff left to do and we've pushed out our publication deadline. So maybe the group wants to come back on some of these.
I did have one quick question, just for clarification. I generally agree with all those requests, but with the street width, would you be interested in saying not just narrow the required street width, but also the required right of way? Some of the right of ways are massive, and a lot of it is to allow like every utility to have their own special little lane. And in other developed countries, they just don't do that. Like you figure it out.
I've heard that discussion actually from your steering committee meetings about the separate, everyone has a separate easement. And I absolutely, if there's a safe and reasonable way to do that, absolutely to combine some of them. Yeah.
And I kind of figure if in more dense cities, they can just dig down through the street to get to their stuff, I feel like we can figure that out. We have the same equipment. So it should be doable, but that's an MSO thing. So that's who's going to have to comment on that.
I'm on board with narrower street residential streets for the reason of traffic calming. Like I proposed that quite a while ago. I would like to see, as far as the overall development profile and cost, but well, that maybe there's a trade-off with having sidewalks on one side and narrower streets. That the other corresponding proposal that I brought is that we need bikeways required on arterials and collectors, not on the internal part of the development as it's currently stated. Because internally, if the streets are narrower, they're going to calm. But we do need bikeways on the collectors and the arterials. So I think we should think about that kind of a trade-off.
Rob, did you have something you wanted to say real quick? Will I have to puzzle this?
I have something.
Real quickly, one other thing to consider on the street trees is what the full canopy looks like, because if you get oak trees 40 feet apart, they will have longevity issues because every other one will kind of will reduce the sunlight and everything to the other tree, and you'll see them die out. That's something other cities have experienced. And so your street tree spacing needs to either plan on taking trees out when they mature, or you need to space them for full maturity. And that's probably not even 50 feet. It's probably 60 feet.
Thanks, Michael.
On the trees.
Yeah, if I could take a few minutes. I'd like to address what you brought up about equity.
Okay.
And I just have to say, I take exception to it.
Okay. As did I.
Historically, zoning has been used to exclude unwanted uses. These are statements currently in the code. Zoning has and continues to be used to exclude historically marginalized groups. And that your claim is that this is not valid, where actually various Supreme Court rulings and academic studies have stated that very thing for a long time. In 1917, the U.S. Supreme Court banned race-based zoning in Buchanan versus Worley. That's the start. Whereas 2 years later, St. Louis, Missouri adopted their plan with the earliest example of single-dwelling large lot zoning. It's written by Howard Bartholomew. He explained that single-dwelling zoning was, quote, protection against the day when racial deed restrictions expire, and, quote, protect the value of the properties from unwanted development. That's specifically why he came up with single large lot dwelling development. It effectively priced minorities out of the market is how it would work. That's the origin of exclusionary zoning, 1919 that was. And we've noted our frustration here, as I've heard, with statute that prohibits us from having inclusionary zoning. We can't do it. So our response has been to follow what a lot of communities like Minneapolis and Walla Walla, Washington, I mean, there's like on my arm, and states, California, Oregon, to eliminate single dwelling zoning. That's what we've been ostensibly having as a goal. But so far, the draft code does not eliminate single family zoning. What Minneapolis actually did is eliminate single dwelling only zoning, homogeneous, all single dwelling developments. We say we're for mixed dwelling developments, but as long as we have R1 zone that allows all single dwelling large lot, we're perpetuating exclusionary zoning. It goes back historically a long way. If we have that R1 zone, we're just continuing it. And I mean, do the math, do the numbers. Economics is going to push developers that way. You can make more money on fewer large lots than you can on multiple small lots, right? That's
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but I appreciate your,
architectural,
I appreciate,
engineering,
Yeah.
all kinds of costs that go into multiple dwellings. So to me, it seemed like we should avoid the possibility of exclusionary zoning by developers that just keep building single dwelling zones.
well, I disagree that single family zoning is evil or creates disproportionate unfairness. I do disagree with that, Michael, respectfully, but my point is that we have a lot of effort in our community to establish equity and opportunity for all citizens of Lawrence. And I thought that was sort of a canned statement that I didn't think applied to the efforts that we've made and seen in Lawrence, Kansas. That was what that came from. So unless somebody specifically said that we are doing something that is excluding a particular group of people, I think that was a very unfair statement. But I guess I didn't anticipate you saying that single family housing did just that. So
I'm not trying to imply that we're intentionally, implying that builders are trying to create.
right. No, I meant as a community, not we builders as a community.
Removing that from our development, those quotes from the code, because historically it has been used that way many years in many places. So,
I don't disagree with that. Historically, it has been. But I feel like today we've really made efforts to not be in that situation.
my concern is possibly not single dwellings, lots or buildings, but a homogeneous, all single large lot that effectively will price minorities and low-income people out of that particular. It's unintentional. I understand that, but we can avoid it if we want to.
I think if I can jump in here, that when Bobby brought this up with me last month, I think what we can do to the video that's on the website is revise it. And since we're getting a lot of interest in the code, we'll do this over the next week or so. Revise it to say Lawrence has put effort into becoming an equitable community and addressing some of these issues. So, to the extent it sounds a little more generic than it should for Lawrence, I'm fine with reworking it and reposting it. I don't know if the group would have any problems with that.
I tried to not dilute the message. I think it's really important that Lawrence and Kansas, even in general, don't rest on their laurels. I mean, everybody always says, "Oh, yeah, it's the free state," but guess who also had segregation for a good couple decades, right? Like, as somebody who's not from here, so I don't really have any place to talk, right? I feel like Lawrence really likes to think of itself as a morally upright bastion of equality, and but we do have single-family zoning still, and have stopped ADUs at every corner until right now. It's taken years and years to even have a reasonable conversation about letting people of lesser means access higher opportunity neighborhoods. The fact that it's taken this long maybe doesn't mean that every person is racist necessarily, but it does mean that the system perpetuates the racism that started it.
I was involved when much of East Lawrence was downzoned from duplex to single family. And the reason that was supported by the neighborhood was they had seen what had gone on in some other neighborhoods where duplex zoning tends to be purchased by landlords or property manager, and not home ownership. So it may be different in that neighborhood because of the size of the neighborhood and the size of many of the houses. But I want to say, how do we keep that home ownership piece available for people? And the more we rely on only, apartments or duplexes, the more we really are not having, I think, as much home ownership. And I now live on a block where we are the only, home occupants, and everything else is duplex. So it is really tied into the size as well as just this idea.
But if we're eliminating, help me out here, if we're eliminating single family housing, we're going more with duplexes and apartments. But you just said that going with more duplexes and apartments reduces home ownership and has more landlord ownership.
Yes.
Then why wouldn't we be, and if you want more home ownership, then why aren't you promoting more single family housing?
I'm just making this argument that we don't want to completely do away with it. I mean, I have said that before in meetings of the steering committee. I've said that.
I'm just trying to figure it out.
I'm not proposing doing away with single dwelling zoning. I'm proposing what Minneapolis and other cities have done, doing away with single dwelling only. So every lot in a subdivision is only single dwelling. I think we're talking about having a mix of ownership of duplex, single dwelling, fourplex. Is it possible? I don't know if we've discussed before that, like with ADU question or bed and breakfast question, that for a fourplex, that one unit has to be owner occupied or something like that, so that we do have ownership, literal and figurative and commitment ownership, as well as a diversity of people, renters and owners combined in size. I'm just looking for a city that has a wide diversity of mix as much as possible.
As am I, which is why I was hoping you would agree with me about removing the limitation on the minimum standards to allow for a little bit more diversity, but instead of on this end, on that end. I would make that same argument. Can I make one more point before we're done? And that is and thank you everyone for your feedback. I'm happy to take this so we can calibrate and come back again before it's over. It's on the approval process. So as I said, I'm really looking forward to these form-based codes, and it's Phil, right?
Yes.
So when Phil brought up his whole point about the concern of the neighbors still having the opportunity to give feedback, that was a little cringy for me, not because I don't want people to have feedback, but to have both a very prescriptive plan and then also to turn around and give feedback. I would call that a hybrid plan. And I would think that in our community would be, with all this work that's been done, I would think that would be very disappointing. If we're not going to go with the prescriptive design standards, then get clear away from them, because by having both, you're not going to see much happen. But I do respect And I understand what you've described as in combination, you can't have both.
If the prescription is sufficiently detailed, okay, then, you know, you should require as much approval.
I think that's the point.
Okay.
That's it right there.
Well, end on agreement there.
Thank you.
Okay, it's 6 o'clock. So let's go back to the schedule real quick. What is the date of our next meeting? Because we clearly need one.
June 17th, I believe, is the third Thursday.
July.
July. I know. This year's
July
going by so
18th.
fast. We're mid 18th. 18th.
July 18th.
Okay.
Okay. You're going to the planning commission
On what's,
on Wednesday. I know some of those questions the planning commissioners have. Are you able to address some of them with them? Would you need our input before
well, we're
addressing those?
there's questions, but many of these are recommendations now.
Yeah.
That the steering committee probably needs to take up. And I want, there's a way to task out of this is, if you guys would, I could put together a list of what those recommendations are. You could send it out to everyone. So the next time we're together, we could just talk about exceptions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think two things. I mean, what I think we want to come from the planning commission is these recommendations to Elizabeth, who then, you know, helps decide whether or not they get incorporated or not, or says, thank you for the recommendation. Here's why, you know, have a conversation with the planning commission and say, yeah, you say that, but here's the drawback with that. And have that conversation so that planning commission Elizabeth can have that conversation, and then we can incorporate those, you know, in or without.
Elizabeth, can I work with you maybe on
Yeah.
how we approach that together?
Would love that. Thank you.
Yeah. I think we can have that conversation. That'd be great. Planning commission,
That'll really
bring those back to us.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
And I still have just a couple of brief items in Article 16 that we just never, we never really talked about.
Let's can you email those to me?
No.
And Elizabeth, and we'll get those on the next agenda.
Yep.
Bobby,
It's
thank
you're
you.
a 3-hour meeting.
Yeah.
Okay,
Look, did you say those were Article 16?
it's at 16.
Thank you.
Article 16, yeah, administrative. Yeah, administration procedures.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Have a conversation.
Study the ants.